So one of the responses from liberals post-Trump re-election that has been kind of interesting is some number of them have been leaving Twitter and fleeing to Blue Sky, the Twitter alternative. We can put this up on the screen in terms of the numbers. Blue Sky apparently, as of several days ago, had added 1 million new members as users flee X after the US election. Now they are up to 15 million, so adding 1 million more is significant given the comparatively small scale of Blue Sky at this point. And in this article, they point out this isn't the first surge that Blue Sky has seen based on like various indicators. So after rebranding to X, apparently there was a big shift to Blue Sky, and then they also picked up 3 million new users after X was suspended in Brazil back in September. And then a further, this one was interesting to me, 1.2 million in the 2 days after X announced that they would allow users to view posts from people who had blocked them. So those were some of the big triggers. I checked on the App Store yesterday, and Blue Sky is still the #1 like downloaded app right now. So there is something very real here, but it's also worth keeping in perspective. Like 15 million users does not even come close to comparing to Twitter, let alone Facebook or TikTok or any of the other large social media giants. I do think it's kind of an important indicator of how liberals are processing and dealing with the fact that, you know, a lot of these social media brands previously coded as more liberal. You know, Mark Zuckerberg running Facebook, certainly Twitter under Jack Dorsey, there was a sense that, you know, it was more on the Democratic side. And now that has totally reversed, not just on Twitter with Elon Musk's ownership, which there was research showing that he did, in fact, use the algorithm to juice Republican or pro-Trump accounts, and obviously including his own account, but also kind of across the board with a bunch of these social media apps. So liberals are taking a page out of what conservatives were doing previously with Parler and Gab and Truth Social and whatever, and saying, hey, we need our own space now too post-Trump election.
Yeah, it's I think, you know, the major reason we're doing the story, not only is it interesting, but it's part of the liberal response, which is to shut off MSNBC and to kind of retreat. And I think it was a big mistake that a lot of Trump people made and right-wingers made in the Twitter era, 2018, and honestly made people way crazier, right? Like the Truth Social, Parler, Gab, and all of these other peoples. We talk a lot about echo chamber. It's easy enough on a large enough platform to get yourself in an echo chamber, but I think it's a mistake because psychologically what they're trying to do is to like recreate their own like world. And I think I sympathize with that on a certain level, but I also don't think it can promote like quote unquote understanding. Because if you're the type of person to have watched MSNBC or be on Blue and on Twitter or whatever, like the truth is like you don't understand the world. And this isn't even in a denigrating way. In 2016, when Donald Trump won the presidency, I'm telling you, I was shocked to my core. It's the reason why I really am today. I sat down and I just said, all these people I read are wrong. I said, everything I've consumed, polling, you know, ideology, how the world works, what Americans think, like, all this bullshit, totally wrong. And I had to completely reevaluate all of my new inputs. So 2020, I wasn't shocked by what happened. 2024, I wasn't shocked by what happened. I can be a little bit surprised, but like to have literally never consumed enough information that you're not truly surprised by an outcome, that was the biggest change I made from 2016 onwards. I encourage people to respond to elections that shock you in a similar way and be like, okay, let's seek some stuff out, because clearly I don't know what the hell is happening here. I don't know if this Blue Sky thing is going to help that, is the way. And I don't think it helped Republicans either. I mean, they overcame the stop the steal insanity of 2020. They got lucky, frankly, that people just like have moved on from it, but they paid a real price for it in 2022 as well. And I will not yet say that the fight is over. Like post-Trump, what does it look like to have Trump-endorsed style candidates without Donald Trump on the ballot?
Yeah.
He overperformed every Republican in the country except for Larry Hogan. So are the incentives that, you know, it's like Obama, are the incentives that worked for him, are they the same for whoever comes next? I'm not so sure. I don't think so.
Yeah, I think the retreat of conservatives to their own social media platforms, I don't think that helped, like Gab, Parler, Truth Social, whatever. Didn't help them, didn't really work. I mean, none of those platforms really gained massive influence in terms of the culture. I think Elon buying Twitter definitely did help them.
Exactly.
And I don't think that, so, you know, these social media networks, in some ways, they're sort of like natural monopolies, you would call them, because the whole value of the network is its size. The value is the number of connections that are there, the number of news outlets that are there. I mean, for us, in terms of the job that we do, like Blue Sky would not be that valuable because I just can't do the news gathering on there that I can do on Twitter, even under Elon's ownership. And so that's why these spinoffs have never really worked. And even Threads, which was the Facebook attempt to kind of like recreate a Twitter-like thing. First of all, they completely suppress. They don't really want political content there, so they suppress political content, so it's not a real alternative. But also, it just doesn't have the juice that Twitter does in terms of the culture. So I don't think liberals are wrong to look at what happened and say, oh my God, Twitter ended up being very important in this election, and we're in this sort of post-truth environment, and it is no longer the case that what happens online is not real life. Actually, what happens online kind of is real life, and that's the era that we live in. There needs to be some sort of response to it. But I am skeptical that, retreating into this more sort of niche ideological space is really going to be the answer. What is the answer? I don't really know, because Elon owns Twitter now. Like, that genie is out of the bottle. That Pandora box has been opened. There's no going back from that. And I think the other social media outlets, like Facebook is an important one. I mean, Facebook used to be more, feel like it had at least somewhat of a democratic inclination, although right-wing content has always done extraordinarily well on Facebook. But Zuckerberg himself obviously used to be more liberal, more pro-Democrat. He's one of the people who, before Trump was elected, was making phone calls and trying to make nice and really trying to overcome this sense from conservatives that he and other tech oligarchs were, in the bag for Democrats. I mean, Zuckerberg came under a lot of, he was part of the whole, theory, the sort of like high-minded stop the steal theory. And so I think by working the refs, Republicans really were successful in getting the type of content moderation that favored their content that they were looking for. And under a Trump administration, like Zuckerberg's going to want to stay in good with, the big guy who's in charge, who's capable of using the federal government, weaponizing it against him and his interests, et cetera. And once again, being like facing the ire of an agitated conservative base. So, I like I said, I'm sympathetic to why people are moving to Blue Sky. I understand it, but I don't really think it's a response to the social media landscape being kind of overwhelmingly right-wing at this point.
Yeah, they just don't get it. And, it's complicated because when people are like, oh, right-wing content's popular on Facebook, it's like, yeah, but that's because it's independent and user-generated, and the mainstream media is already liberal. So, like, when the vast majority of the culture is liberal, then and institutional stuff is quote-unquote liberal, then, yeah, user-generated content is going to be predominantly right-wing. That's another reason why YouTube and others, because it's literally a dissonant space. It's one that doesn't exist for institutional, elite capture. If you want that, it already exists. There's an entire machine for it. So I wouldn't say that they worked the refs or whatever. I mean, there was an overwhelming, but there was an overwhelming amount of right-wing censorship that also happened under Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. The Hunter Biden laptop is the most famous example, but there was a lot of, algorithmic preference and stuff that they put their own thumb on the scales. Twitter, obviously, probably the most censorious platform prior to Elon Musk. And I think what happened ultimately is that, when you say online is right-wing, I think that's because America is a lot more right-wing than people want to believe. I think that America, especially with the Trump victory and the popular vote and the massive shift for a lot of these places, it's not the platform's fault. I think people themselves were responding to social, political, and economic incentives and have fundamentally changed. They're not right-wing in the way that most people think. Like, they're not right in the way that you may think in the 1990s about gay marriage or abortion even. But, are they right-wing on the trans question? Yeah. On immigration? Yeah. Are they right-wing in a sense that they hate institutions? Absolutely. In terms of backlash against Me Too, that's something we talked a little bit about yesterday. Like, that is a sense in which being online is right-wing, but there's also a tremendous amount of quote-unquote left-wing content and a lot of left-wing social movements, which then in and of themselves have their roots in online. So all online has done is it's niched, most of American society. That's how really what I would say the overall net effect of it is. And I think that's actually bad because outside of the whole echo chamber thing, again, exposure to different stuff that you must do. Actually, in an algorithmic world, I find you must do it more so and more intentionally than ever before. You must intentionally seek out things that you not only disagree with, things that will rock your worldview so that you're never surprised by anything. And I have to read so much and talk to you and do a lot of other stuff just to be able to like still check my biases. And I don't think most people do that intentionally at all. That's the real danger. That's why you shouldn't do this blue sky retreat. That's what the mistake is.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess from the liberal perspective, they're like, yeah, but Republicans like shut themselves into a bubble and it worked out okay for them.
Okay.
So I think that's a sense.
You win sometimes and you also lose. The
other thing I would say is, in some senses, yes, like I think the country on certain issues, certainly on immigration, has moved right, but Trump still didn't even win 50% of the vote.
Okay.
So you don't want to also don't want to like, oh, the country like 75%. They didn't vote, 75% didn't vote for Trump. It was 49.8 or whatever it's going to end up being. So it still is very much a 50-50 kind of a country. And when you look at a bunch of the more liberal ballot initiatives across the country, certainly the country's not right-wing on abortion rights. Country's not right-wing on, minimum wage, not right-wing on not having paid sick leave or things like that, of that nature. So it's, to me, it's not as clear cut. I think more to the point, Sagar, that you made, the piece that resonated more with me was that liberals have always felt like they had their own spaces already. Yeah. Like they felt comfy with the New York Times and the Washington Post and
they do.
And CNN and whatever. I do think some of that has shifted. Like it's not as much antipathy towards those organizations as Republicans have, certainly, but there is a real shift among the liberal base that started even, before Joe Biden got out of the race. And again, some of their critiques I agree with, some of them I don't agree with, but there has been a real breaking of the faith with liberals and the institutions where they have always felt like they're totally comfortable and like they were, their perspective was being held up and, they could see themselves in the coverage there. And so it does create an interesting moment for, different social media experiments, for different, podcasts and independent media, et cetera, that didn't exist before. So in any case, I kind of view this in the light of that new liberal experimentation and that new liberal break with some of the institutions that they previously felt so confident and comfortable in during the last iteration. The one last piece we can show you here just to see this graphically of what it has looked like. We can put this D2 up on the screen. So you can see a surge in blue sky daily visits right after the election. And then you can also see a huge surge in X account deactivations. So there has just definitely been, for people who are not like necessarily as into politics as we are, where they're just kind of like, this space is just not really where I want to be anymore. I think some of it is that too, where it's just like, I'm just kind of done here in the Elon Elon Twitter era. I'm just kind of done with this. And so there is definitely something happening here. And like I said, to me, it's just emblematic of this new landscape of like, okay, well, the things we did to respond to Trump last time didn't work. The institutions we relied on to help guide us through this time utterly failed us. So let's try some other things and see what's going to happen.
Well, that actually can be very healthy. So I remember I would meet like predominantly old ladies who really hated Trump, and they were like, I fought him on social media. And like they believed that. They believed they were engaged in a war by retweeting Mueller, she wrote, and Seth Abramson and all these other, Eric Garland and all these social media stars from last time around. And I think it may be healthy this time that they're like, wait, no, that doesn't work. There are a lot of people who live entire lives via proxy. And that's the one thing I would beg you, don't do that. I noticed this with Ukraine. People literally believe that they're fighting on the front, on the quote, democracy front line or whatever, by tweeting against people who disagree with their position on Ukraine, or by like retweeting and reposting Ukrainian propaganda. Like, is that beneficial to their cause? Like, maybe. Are you the same as a frontline soldier? No, absolutely not. There's a big thing like that in political, political commentary, and even just political stats and all that I notice on Twitter. Like, there's an entire army of people who are on Twitter who like believe that they're really impacting things for Donald Trump and his victory. Maybe 0.05% of them are. The rest, it's like you're just chaff, right? You're just like retweeting and doing nothing mostly with your life. So I think that is also perhaps a healthy response, because I noticed a lot of that.
I've actually kind of shifted my view on that, because I think that the posting was really important. for Trump's victory.
But that's a selection bias because it's the people who are good at it that work. The vast majority are reply guys.
But you need the reply guys. Yeah. You need the retweeters. Like that's part of what makes the ecosystem work. And so when you think of the story of this election, you know, one of the big divides that came out is that people who were hyper engaged in political news, who were reading the New York Times or even engaged in, you know, MSNBC or whatever, Fox News, hyper engaged political news media consumers, they voted for Kamala. And people who were not hyper engaged, who were consuming this election more through just memes and culture and vibes, they voted for Donald Trump. So I don't think I can say at this point that the posting doesn't matter. I think the posting was important. I think that the memes that came out of Trump at McDonald's and the image that came out after the assassination attempt with his fist in the air and the garbage truck, like all this stuff, which was just about online fodder and meme content. I don't know. I think posting actually ended up being important. I do think online is kind of the real world now. And, liberals do have to grapple with that. And people on the left have to grapple with that as well. So I don't think it used to be that. I think this is kind of a new era we've entered into with the whole podcast election and the downfall of media ecosystems and the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk. But I actually think they're right, that they are engaged in a real social movement that had real world impacts because so much of our life does exist online now and there isn't that separation there used to be.
Yeah, I guess that's a good counter. I hadn't thought about it, I guess. I think it more existed and worked on the right because people are already not on mainstream media. And this comes to our MSNBC question. Will they stay on mainstream media or not? That I really don't know. Yeah. I think they'll go back. I think they will.
But online is the culture now. That's the thing.
I've always
and
believed
so,
it,
culture obviously feeds politics. Yeah. So if you aren't competing in the online culture, you're going to get your ass kicked.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll see. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.